It's time to go on the record with WRAL News.
Thanks for joining us for a special edition of On the Record. I'm Lena Tillett. Tonight, we'd like to begin with some numbers. Less than 10%. Black residents in Wake County received less than 10% of the home loans approved in 2019, and they were twice as likely to be denied a home loan as a white applicant. 43%. The median Black or Hispanic household in Wake County earns 43% less than the median white household. Why should you know that? Why is this disparity worth uncovering? And what responsibility does Wake County have in combating inequity? Answering these questions is the new mission of a joint effort by the group A Better Wake. That's a partnership between Wake County, the Raleigh Chamber, and many more groups. And together they have drafted a very dense 60-page report called A Blueprint for Dismantling Systemic Racism. Tonight, we'll discuss what they found and why they're asking the community to get involved in crafting solutions with them in a series of upcoming town halls. And joining us tonight for our panel is Crystal Carmichael with the Division of Race Equity in the Wake County government, Brian C. Ralph, the president of William Peace University, Tori Staten, the vice president of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Raleigh Chamber, and Crystal Taylor, who's the co-founder of the Black Farmers Market, all who were involved in the process of drafting this very dense report and also coming up with solutions in it. You know, back in another life, when I thought I wanted to be a journalist that covered Wall Street, an economist told me the reason so many people feel they don't understand economics is because they just don't understand the vocabulary. So I really think it's important before we even launch into this discussion to define what some of these words mean, particularly systemic racism. Dr. Staten, what is systemic racism? How is that defined based on this report? Why is it important?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and be as simple and as succinct as I possibly can. Systemic racism, when we think about racism, historically, we think about an interpersonal relation, right? So person A doesn't like person B because of the color of their skin. They don't think they are attractive because of the color of their skin. They don't think they are smart because of the color of their skin, and so on and so forth. And when we examine the harm that can happen between person A and person B, we think about person B, right? Because they were on the receiving end of the prejudice and the discrimination, right? So the key in systemic racism is that systems part. And so we take that interpersonal relationship and we move out, we zoom out, and we look at systems, we look at institutions, we look at laws, and we look at ways that those can perpetuate that same type of harm in that interpersonal relationship, but on a larger scale. And we know because of historical context that there was once a time in this country where Black, Hispanic, brown, indigenous people were believed to be inferior to white people. We know that because there were laws, it was grounded in our law. We know that because there were societal norms around that. We know that because there were cultural practices around that, right? And so when we think about something like systemic racism, we think about all the systems that were built and that were maintained during those times, and how that foundational belief affected and created barriers for Black, brown, and indigenous people because they were founded on that belief, right? So when we think about the school system, how is it founded on that belief and how has it maintained that belief over time? When we think about the criminal justice system, how has it maintained that belief over time? And you can see those barriers, you can see that impact in those disparities, much like the ones you listed a second ago. And you can see how Black, brown, and indigenous people really interact with those systems, again, that were founded and in many ways maintained based off of that foundational belief that Black, brown, and indigenous people are inferior to white people.
So what was the catalyst, Ms. Carmichael, for this particular project, this blueprint in examining how systemic racism is impacting Wake County right now?
Yeah, so one of the things that you mentioned earlier were the numbers of how Black and brown people are disadvantaged by so many different systems. And one of the things Wake County did was understand the architectural foundation of how we operate, how we do business, how we treat our citizens. And we found that there were four main categories that Black and brown people were disadvantaged, and that was health, economic mobility, criminal justice, and education. And so we looked at what those looked like in those specific areas, and then we wanted to talk about what were the needs that needed to be addressed in order to make sure that historically marginalized populations have those same opportunities to get a home loan, to get a good education, to be economically progressive. And so those were the areas that we decided to look at to make sure that our Black and brown population is being served.
Was there something in particular that sparked this effort, though? I know there was a groundswell of interest, I'll say, in racial equity, in DEI, in learning how systems impact people of color after the murder of George Floyd. Was this associated with that, or was this just trying to uncover how the disparities were impacting the county?
Well, I think that I, as well as everybody in the world, had to watch those murders of George Floyd, not only George Floyd, but Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. And that did spark a level of awareness that I think some of us may not have had before. However, we understand that the architectural foundation of this country was based on superiority, and that was where I dare not say that we started this work. This has been work that's been done for decades, for so many years, and we are standing on the shoulders of giants that started this work. And so I think that when we did have to witness those murders of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and so many countless others whose names we never want to forget, that did awaken us to, wow, what can we do? And there were so many organizations across the county that asked that question, what can we do? And then this document, this project was created to lay out somewhat of a blueprint on what we actually can do.
I want to bring in our other two guests here because you all were part of the blueprint. So you mentioned the four categories: health disparity, education, economic mobility, and the criminal justice system. There was that intense data collection. I understand you all worked with Research Triangle Institute to really uncover the numbers. But then you brought in the people, all the players, including you, Dr. Ralph, with William Peace University, and you, Crystal, with the Black Farmers Market, to get in a room or Zoom room and talk about these numbers and what you think needs to happen to cut into these disparities. Tell me about some of those discussions. What were they like?
Sure. So I had the pleasure of serving on the education work group, and the discussions were wide-ranging. And frankly, early on, as we were grappling with the data and some of the opportunities to really make an impact, it was a bit overwhelming because there are so many different places that we could really tackle. The group very quickly decided that the K-12 system was really at the core of what we needed to do. We certainly talked about pre-K, we talked about higher ed opportunities after the K-12 system, but felt like the moment of impact and the opportunity to make the greatest impact was in the K-12 system. And as a university leader, I know that if we are able to address the challenges there, the opportunities that universities are going to be able to provide will be so much more rich for the students who currently are not having access to those opportunities.
Having so many people from so many different industries, did it make for really lively discussions? Were they uncomfortable?
I don't know that uncomfortable. They're definitely challenging because everybody had different experiences and coming from different worldviews. The benefit of how the groups were structured is because there were so many different voices, there were different experiences and different perspectives, both inside education as well as outside education. And that was incredibly valuable to ultimately lead us to the recommendations and goals that we set.
Ms. Taylor, any tough discussions you can remember that maybe even pushed you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I feel that it was a very difficult conversation to have and to hear some of the pushback from people's opinions and perspectives around what should happen or what shouldn't happen. It was a moment to be able to express yourselves in a way that we had not been able to before on that kind of platform. And it triggered the idea around there's a real ingrained perspective among some people in the community that some things may not need to change, and because it might be not their benefit to change. And
Let's talk a little bit about that, because I imagine not everybody thinks that systemic racism is real. Not everybody thinks that, some people say, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. I have to deal with challenges. Why should I be trying to help a person of color also deal with challenges.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation definitely happened in a different degree. I was in the health work group a couple of times, and well, several times, and it was definitely difficult to hear people talk about how they did not want to make efforts to change what they were already going through to do on a regular basis to serve their communities or their patrons. And to hear that and to push back on it and to go back and forth around why this is important, why people are suffering, why we need to help people in these communities that are suffering and have health disparities because of their lack of fresh foods and vegetables and access to that, it was a common theme ongoing. And so it never clicked to some people in the group.
Wow, it never did.
I don't think so.
Wow.
No, not coming out of the conversation around the way we wanted to make sure that these goals were top priorities. They weren't to some individuals, and that's okay, but it's not to the grand scheme of what we need to be doing as a community to work together.
Were their minds changed? Some minds, meaning?
Some minds,
okay.
But at the end of the day, we did understand that what we need to work around to fix. We understood that there were people that we need to continue working with to understand what was going on. It was draining to a certain degree because there's this narrative, as Ms. Stanton talked about, that this is who these people are and we're inferior to another group of people, that we don't need certain systems in place. We don't need changes in place, but we absolutely do. And so it was great to be able to be in that space to say that out loud and give the ideas and give the suggestions and give the recommendations that need to be changed so people can have a healthier life, they can have accessibility to food and fresh wellness and being. And to be able to say that out loud, to push back to narratives that have been ingrained in people's minds was a great opportunity.
Wow. Well, when we come back, we're going to look into some more of the specifics of this report, some specific numbers that may surprise you. Welcome back. We are discussing a brand new effort by many in Wake County trying to dismantle systemic racism in the county. And there's a blueprint, and we want to look at what it uncovered. Let's talk about education, because this was really interesting. Title I schools, it shows in 2020, 54% of Black and 52% of Hispanic and Latino elementary school students attended Title I schools, compared with 18% of white students. So what does that mean? Title I schools are higher risk schools. The quality of education for Black and brown children, what does that tell you about their potential outcomes if so many in our county are going to Title I schools, Dr. Staten?
So I think there are multiple things that statistic can tell you. I think number one, it can tell you that there is a level of education, a comfort in education that they aren't receiving at that time, whether that is learning a specific skill, learning a specific subject, even in some cases, having a certain type of teacher who can work with you more. Title I schools tend to be overcrowded. There tend to be more than a standard number of students in a classroom. There tend to be a lot of students who are on free and reduced lunch, right? And so you can see that there are students who are also below the poverty line. And so I think there are many different factors that go into multiple students attending a Title I school. And oftentimes when multiple students are crowded into those Title I schools, those specific issues can almost be, what's the word I'm looking for? They can almost be catalysts for more issues to happen, right? And so focusing on things like Title I schools, understanding what a student attending a Title I school might have to experience, it's important to be able to articulate that, number one, for those students, but number two, for those people who work there, who are, often dealing with multiple students and, spending 18 hours a day on school grounds, trying to make sure they're supporting students and helping students who have those additional issues that will impact their ability to be successful in their education. I think it's not just about students, but it's about the people in the community who work in that space, who are really doing their best, but don't have the tools and resources to really, really advance themselves.
And Dr. Ralph, you were in that education working group. You were kind of alluding to some of the goals that you connected, because each number, each statistic, there's a goal associated with it. You all weren't just saying, here are a bunch of problems. You were also talking about solutions. So what would be a solution to so many Black and brown kids going to Title I schools?
Yes, obviously it's a resource challenge for the schooling, but also one of the characteristics of Title I schools is you often have family members who are not able to be as engaged in the school because they're juggling multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet. And so being able to develop a good, strong support network for the students and, as Dr. State mentioned, all of the staff and teachers who are at those schools is critically important to allow them to create the environment where those students can really thrive.
Do you think school systems would be open to that? I mean, is this something that you think is immediately actionable?
I think that I certainly believe that the school leadership here has been very interested in how they can create a more equitable system, and there's been a lot of great steps that have been taken. And of course, this work is really at a high level and trying to build an architecture and a framework that we can help as a community support what Wake County Public Schools wants to do, and also provide additional ideas and suggestions of what we believed in the work that we did that could really continue to elevate their work.
Is that the goal ultimately, Ms. Carmichael, to bring it to Wake County Public School leaders, this research, and say, hey, this is what we've learned, how can we support you as a group, different industries? What's the ultimate goal?
Absolutely. So we are already working with Wake County Public Schools, and they already have an equity division that is very much aligned with what we've laid out in the blueprint. And so we are right now partnering with Wake County school systems to make sure that we are making available the right resources so that students have access to a fair education.
I want to talk about one other number that I thought was really interesting, because it's regarding students and schools, but it's in the criminal justice section. So you actually talk about school suspensions in the criminal justice section, and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice found that Black students in Wake County were 7 times more likely than white students to receive a suspension. They make up, I think we have a graphic, about 50% of school suspensions, even though they make up 20% of the school population. What are we to take from that?
Well, one of the things that we know is, like you said, Black students are much more likely to be suspended than their white counterparts. And when you are suspended from school, that free time, that time that's unsupervised, that makes you 8 times more likely to get involved with the criminal justice system. And so we're trying to eliminate, we really want students to be in a system, an educational system, where they have access to the things that they need so that they can learn. And sometimes that means looking at our standard for suspensions. And if our Black students are being suspended more, why is that? And what resources can we provide so that they don't have that free time that makes them at risk for getting involved with the criminal justice system?
Is ultimately the goal to obviously reduce that number, but absolutely, to bring more teachers in, more social workers in? What are some actionable steps? Absolutely.
So by reducing that number of suspension, we want to actually eliminate that school to prison pipeline. So we want to, that recidivism rate that we're seeing with young people that are getting involved with the criminal justice system, we want to offer resources. We want to increase the access to teachers that actually have the time, that are not overwhelmed, the time to focus on students who may need that additional help. So yes, we want to provide the resources that schools are needing to service the students that may need that additional help, so we're not running into those behaviors that cause suspension.
What's so fascinating about this report, again, is that you continue to look into solutions. And the group came up with some really interesting solutions I think you'll want to hear. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing a new effort in Wake County to dismantle systemic racism as a community. And I want to bring in you, Ms. Taylor, because you have the Black Farmers Market. You have already done work in trying to make sure that people have access to healthy food, all communities. Talk about why it was important for you to get involved in this effort and how they can support you as you're trying to make sure that people get access to healthy food.
Well, it's been a great experience because Black farmers have been, discriminalized for a very, very long time and years. And it's been great to be able to have support with making sure the farmers have a platform, a space to sell their food, to help build sustainability in their families and generational wealth. And especially because the amount of health disparities that Black people are suffering with has been, out of this world. And when we look at where they're living, what they have access to, and what kind of things they're being exposed to, it helps make sure that we can change the narrative for our community. And so the work groups, and the document has been really liberating to a degree because it helps make sure we have a plan. People are hearing what we want to do, what we can do for our community, and being in it with them, we're able to express like what the needs are and what the complaints are of the community.
What specifically did you want from the group to help support you?
I wanted to make sure they heard our voice and also have the resources to give us the access to be able to support us. And I feel that on a regular basis, working with the group, being able to be loud about it and not have to worry about toning anything down and just saying exactly what the community needs and what our problems are, what we're suffering from, just as the Black market in general, to support the farmers. And they have gave us a lot of access. They have shared a lot of space with us to give our opinions and what our needs are. And so it's been very liberating, to be honest, because we've not been able to get that in a lot of other spaces.
Dr. Staten, final question is for you. You have these town halls coming up. We talked about these working groups, but clearly you want to bring in more voices. So what are you hoping to get out of those?
I'm really hoping to engage the community on what this is, teach them about some of those same statistics that you talked about, and really gauge the people who really want to get involved and help. This is going to be a community effort. This is Wake County, this is the Triangle DEI Alliance and the Raleigh Chamber, as well as wonderful people like Dr. Ralph and Ms. Taylor, who are doing this work every day in the community. And we want to bring everyone together, provide a space, provide a safe layout where we can have these discussions, some of them, easier to have than others. But if we're not talking about it, then those statistics, those disparities are going to continue. And so we have to stand in what we believe in, wanting this to be truly a better Wake County and doing our part, whether that is bringing notoriety to Black farmers, or whether that is working with college students every day, or even the work that Ms. Carmichael and I do with different municipalities. We really want to bring people together to have these conversations and to ultimately make solid systemic change.
Thank you all so much for joining me. Again, the report is very dense. I read it, 60 pages, lots to it. We only got to cover just a slice. I certainly encourage you to check it out as well. You can also register to be part of those upcoming town halls on April 11th, 27th, May 9th, and May 30th. And you can see which discussion would be happening at each. The first will be about health disparities. The link to register is raleighchamber.com/events. And if you have something to say about tonight's discussion, email us your questions or criticisms on the record at WRAL.com, or find me on Facebook at WRAL Lena Tillett. Have a great night.